Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Adams, and I am honored to be your host for the session 3 Before Me, using AI as a reflection and feedback tool for students. It's exciting to be a part of the AI in Action Shaping K-20 virtual conference, and I look forward to walking you through this pre-recorded demo of the content. All right, so as I mentioned, my name is Amanda Adams, and I am the Virtual Learning and Professional Development Coordinator for the Kenai Peninsula Borough School District in Alaska. I consider myself a professional learning partner, someone who works with people all over the world and certainly in all different venues to put learners first and really center our practices around what's good for our learners. So let's go through a couple of different things using established strategies and augment those with AI. So one of the things that we really want to center on is that core of student-centered learning at the base of everything that we do, right? So we start with a best practice. We can do this on all sorts of fronts. Start with a best practice. And in this case, we're talking about empowering students with that self-efficacy through reflection and ownership in the learning process. So once we've got that as our focus, then we can take a lens surrounding the actual tool of AI, because it's not about the tool itself, it's about what we do with that tool, right? It's the practice of augmenting learning, of improving the learning experience. Technology itself is ubiquitous. It really doesn't do anything in particular on its own. It's how we use it that makes it truly powerful. So our success criteria for this session centers around 3 things. First, I want you to be able to articulate some best practices for reflection and feedback for students. Secondly, I want to make sure that you can conceptualize this concept of 3 before me, what that strategy even is. And then the third piece is recognizing how AI can be used with that strategy to augment that reflection and feedback process for students. So these are the 3 things that we have as our mission for this session. All right, so we're going to start with the strategy of 3 before me. And in the live session, we'll certainly do a thumbs up or thumbs down. So think to yourself, in this case, in this scenario, have you heard of it before? So if you haven't, we're going to go into depth. If you have, hopefully we'll be able to add to your thinking. Secondly, do you have a sense in your mind of what the best practices are for reflection? So when you're thinking about student learning, when you're thinking about how we incorporate reflection currently in our practices, what does that look like? And then finally, what are the best practices for feedback? When we're giving feedback to students, what really makes feedback powerful? So let's take a look into these things. All right, so historically, it has been pretty pervasive that we must wait on the teacher for literally everything, to know what we're doing, what's expected of us, how we have to show our learning, whether or not we're even progressing, right? And if you look at these aspects of instructions, feedback, next steps, it's always been a waiting game. So when we talk about this student-centered component, it's about putting the student really in that driver's seat. And when you look at researchers across the world, some of my favorites centering in this work are John Hattie, Marzano, Carol Dweck, and Duckworth. Those 4 really center on that grit, resiliency, student-centered, student ownership, all of those pieces being as foundational to really effective learning. And then we add a layer on there of some practitioners like Catlin Tucker and Alice Keeler. I'm giving you all these names so you can look them all up if you would like to, full of resources. Catlin Tucker and Alice Keeler for many years have been putting students really at the forefront of their practices. And so Alice Keeler has one of my favorite quotes: "The person doing the work is also the person doing the learning." And so when teachers do everything, when the students are constantly waiting on the teacher for every single next step, for every single detail, then it's the teacher doing the work, and we are diminishing or lessening what the student is able to accomplish because we've taken much of the power out of their hands. So when we talk about this concept of students really being given the power to unhinge what has traditionally been considered learning, putting them in the driver's seat, putting them ready to go, they literally just shine in ways that we had no idea were possible up to this point. So let's dive in. Strategy. What in the world is 3 before me? So 3 before me is a classroom management strategy that's used here in the United States, probably in many other countries across the world as well. And it's where the student is expected to seek help from 3 resources prior to asking the teacher for assistance. So that could be that they ask the classmates, that could be that they consult their textbook or the directions, that could mean that they are required to search online. And what you're seeing here on the left side of the screen is some examples of different graphics that teachers use that really capture the idea of whether or not the student's first stop should be the teacher. In fact, we want to empower them to have multiple access points for their next steps, or multiple access points to get their questions answered, multiple access points for to get that feedback, to get the information that they need, right? So the concept of 3 before me is simply establishing 3 different references, 3 different resources that a student can access, and in fact is expected to access prior to coming to the teacher for that next piece of information. So it's a pretty straightforward concept, and you can apply it in so many different ways. So what we're going to do is take that strategy and we're going to enter in some AI, and then we're going to enter in specifics surrounding reflection and feedback, right? So in this case, we're going beyond the classroom management component and into the learning process and how this strategy can be applied. So 3 before me, when you use the AI aspect to empower students, there are some key pieces. For example, they can use AI to explain the directions in different terms. If they just simply had a question, right? They can reflect on whether or not they understood it. They could put the directions into AI and then say, this is how I understand these directions to mean, and the AI can offer them some clarification. It can offer alternatives for vocabulary. So we can empower students to self-determine, whether or not they understand a particular word that was used in the learning experience. And then they can put that into AI to get alternative explanations. They can put that into AI to get a clearer understanding of what the context or the explanation, what the text is, all of the pieces that they're using for their learning, they can clarify that vocabulary and understanding. And then finally, they can use AI to generate ideas for solutions. So for example, if they are working on some piece and they're not sure, they have a problem that they've encountered, whether it's a tech problem, whether it's a content problem, whether it's an issue with understanding the rubric or the grading criteria, then the AI can be used to generate ideas for solutions for the students. And then finally, the AI can help empower students by helping them articulate their questions. So they can actually prepare to meet with the teacher and be informed by having clarified questions, having solutions in mind, making sure that they have understood the directions or the scoring criteria. And then finally, it can help students empower them to prioritize their next steps. They can have a sense of what it is that they need to do first, second, and third. And this can be great for students when they really struggle with organizational skills, when they struggle with executive functioning. All right, so let's take and enter some reflection in there as well. So they can analyze criteria for areas of support. They're given a scoring guide. The students can put that into the AI, and then they can reflect upon, by asking questions through the AI, they can reflect and determine where they need more information. Maybe they understand one concept, but not another. If they're writing a 5-paragraph essay, maybe they have some questions surrounding compound complex sentences. So they need to do a little bit more information there. So they can take that criteria, put it into AI, and they can use the AI to ask them questions about what the different criteria are and identify areas that they could build their knowledge. They can also use the AI to generate reflection questions. If they put in what they're doing, where they're at in the process, then the AI can offer them some reflection questions to go with that scoring criteria and help the students determine whether or not they are on the right track. They can help students create prompts to expand their thinking. If they're going through with the AI and having their scoring criteria, their solution ideas, their project ideas, they can have prompts to expand their thinking. So they can say, this is what I understand this to be. What would be the next step? And then it helps them have a conversation partner to both get those reflection questions and expand their thinking so that the students are moving beyond where they started in the content usage. It can also provide them examples to evaluate. If they give the scoring criteria to the AI, they can ask them to provide them some examples of that thing, and they can be able to reflect whether or not they think it's a good example, a bad example, whether they agree, disagree. All the while, this is moving that metacognitive process along for the students. So now let's take it to the feedback side of things. So they can compare the criteria and the draft. So if the students have gone through that reflection and metacognitive process and now they're ready, they've got a draft, they can feed that in to that AI and be able to get some suggestions for improvement. They can also evaluate their ideas for the best fit. If they have several different ways that they're thinking they might meet that success criteria, then the AI can provide them feedback on which ones are most feasible, which ones they might have the most strength in, and so on and so forth. Analyzing their plan for next steps. So the AI could be able to, you can throw it into Gemini, you can throw it into Perplexity or ChatGPT, any of them, it doesn't matter. You can, any type of conversational AI, you can throw it in and say, here's my next steps that I'm planning. The AI can offer feedback on which one they might prioritize, which one might be, they might need more information, or which one they might break down into further steps. And they can also edit initial work. If they're writing a 5-paragraph essay, or they're writing a lab report, or a math problem, or whatever the initial work is, they can feed that into the AI for some initial feedback on whether or not they're on the right track. All right, so, and now, after those 3 pieces, now we enter in the teacher, right? Then the teacher, the student comes with the best representation of their skill to work with the teacher. And then the student and teacher interaction is highly targeted, directed at the questions and skills and information that the student knows they need because they've already done the reflection process and already gotten some feedback from the AI. And then finally, the student has those needs, right? And the teacher can target their instruction, that time that they have with that student, to the needs that that student needs, that student has identified. And then together, those pieces really allow that when the student is working with the teacher, it is the maximum efficiency that it could possibly be. And so now that we have considered this concept of 3 before me with some integration of AI and reflection and feedback, is 3 before me a strategy that you could use in your practice? And if so, how? Right? Whether it's a classroom management strategy, whether it's, targeted at the AI and reflection and feedback tool that we're talking about, I'm curious to know. So you could pause this video and check that out, but let's keep going on the content in the meantime. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about reflection. We talked about how to use it with the 3 before me, the idea that the student starts with the information, Then they have that AI where they ask a question and it goes back and forth between AI and human, the layers and layers and layers, until they are done doing whatever task they have to do. But we need to think a little bit about what are the best practices for student reflection. You got to be consistent. It's got to have a structured design. So the students have to know that they're going to be able to integrate AI into the process. They have to understand that the expectation is that they would want to reflect on their work, and that reflection comes with a structured design. So, for example, the students will have a specific question or series of questions that they can use to reflect at every given stage. So if they have a project that they're working on, at the end of stage 1, they're expected to go to AI, put in the reflection question, and then go back and forth with some discussion before they move on to the next stage of the assignment. And so those results are then used for action, right? So that why would we reflect unless we're going to do something differently or do something with that information? And then we want to make sure that we're providing explicit instruction on reflection skills. Not everyone is a natural reflector. Not everyone can look at themselves objectively or even with any kind of equanimity to see how they're performing. And so the idea that we would focus specifically on the skill, or we would focus specifically on articulating how they feel about something, etc. Now, when we're thinking about all of these pieces being consistent and being structured, then we want to use that AI to augment that reflection by providing, for example, structured prompts, like I mentioned, at every single juncture that it's appropriate for throughout the work that the student is doing. We want to make sure that we provide that continual access so that the metacognition is tangible. Because I reflected, my project looks different in these ways, right? They want to be able to see the difference that the reflection has allowed. And then we also know that it offers that objective considerations that the students can choose to take or discard. We're again empowering them to make the choices that if they reflect and then they ask for some feedback or some details surrounding their reflection, they can take or leave the observations that are made. They're not required to integrate them. In fact, that's the critical thinking and analysis piece, and that metacognition that where it manifests itself in their work. So when we're thinking about when reflection should enter the learning process, that is where we want to think about our thoughts on that. When in the process of work, right? The scope of work that you're having students do. Is it a weekly thing? Is it a daily thing? Is it something that's at the end of every class so that they know where they're leaving off as an exit ticket sort of deal? Is it a periodic thing that happens throughout the process of a project or an assignment so that the students know when and it's consistent, right? And then they can use it effectively when it's not a surprise and it's not unplanned and they know what those prompts are. All right, let's talk about the feedback side of that a little bit. Let's talk about best practices for feedback. Feedback needs to be immediate. That's where AI becomes fantastic because the teacher often has many students that they have to support, and that immediacy is a real drawback, but AI can fill that hole in the early stages particularly. But also that frequency. Just because they got some initial feedback, they make some changes, they need some more feedback. It's an ongoing iteration that is really difficult for a teacher to manage. But we also want to make sure that that feedback uses third point evidence. So it's not about the student, it's about the essay they're writing. It's not about the student, it's about that product, their slideshow, that presentation that they're creating. We want to make sure that we structure that feedback so it's about that third point, that product or demonstration of their work. We want to make sure that feedback is also targeted. We want to make sure that it's very specific. If you have a student submit a piece of work at the end, after they've done all the work and the teacher's never seen it until the submission at the end, then we miss the opportunity for targeted feedback along the way so that the product is actually manifesting with all of the learning that was intended. Otherwise, we tend to miss things, and then the student has no opportunity to utilize that feedback for targeted action, because it's all about focusing on the next steps. Why would we give feedback unless it's going to be used in some way immediately? That is where the learning happens. And so when we think about that and how AI can augment that feedback, we can use a formula in the prompt for feedback. We can offer the students examples of their prompts, and then they just plug in the information that's specific to the thing that they're wanting feedback on. We can also propose action steps to choose from. So you can ask AI to, in the feedback, because of the prompt, the students get to make a choice of those action steps, of which one they might want to take or which one they might prioritize. And then you could also offer the students sentence stems. So a sentence stem is where you start a sentence and the student finishes it. So that might look like, I will utilize this step here. And then the student has to fill in the step. They're having to answer the question of what that next step is that they're going to be, so that they can take action on that feedback. So we can provide sentence stems. The most reasonable action step is blank, because blank. And then the student can then finish those pieces so that they have a clear sense of what the next step is for them. But I really want to make sure that we're clear. Oops, sorry. I want to make sure that we're clear on that formula to make sure that we're understanding the same thing. A feedback formula. Feedback should include, what is the problem? What is the impact of that problem? How does it change the product? And then what is the solution that can come of that? The feedback doesn't always provide a solution, but you could prompt it for a solution or a series of solutions. So that's where you propose those action steps so that the student can choose from them. And then a great piece here, and this is really where the teacher kind of comes in, is that sharing of a resource. Where would they go to get more information about that thing? Although AI, in some cases, depending on what you're doing, can be a resource. It can pool and provide more information on the topic. We definitely want to have more than one source for feedback, right? So AI is just one of the several that we want to provide. But we really want to make sure that that prompt is used as a formula. All right. Now, how does the integration of feedback fit into the learning process? So this is where I want you to think about right now, of like, where does the student have reflection in the learning process, and where does the student get feedback? Because we're having it prompt for the metacognition and the thinking of the student first. Then the student shares something with the AI, some initial draft, some initial thinking, and then they get feedback on that, right? So it's a reflection, feedback, reflection component that happens throughout the learning process. So when you're thinking about the things that you do, where does the integration fit for feedback into the learning process? Is it only at the end, or can it be throughout? At least at several very targeted spaces throughout the work. All right, let's put it all together a little bit here. If you use 3 Before Me to build in student ownership, AI becomes the learning partner. It becomes the thing that they rely on along the way to get immediate and frequent interaction. And then we add that layer of reflection using AI to help develop that metacognition, push their thinking, help them ask questions, help them understand all the material that they were given. We can then use AI to provide that actionable feedback at targeted junctures in the learning process to deepen that impact, right? Without that feedback coming back to them, then we miss out on the maximum amount of growth, the maximum amount of gain. If we don't provide feedback in the learning process, we are missing huge amounts of gain that are possible. So in the end, when a student partners with the teacher, after using 3 Before Me with an AI partner, the discussion is informed and targeted, and the student is empowered to take more action and therefore deeper learning. All right, so did we meet our success criteria? We talked about the best practices for reflection and feedback for students. We conceptualized this 3 before me strategy, and we talked about how AI can augment reflection and feedback for students. So here we are at the end. I want to thank you for your attention. I look forward to delivering this live at the conference coming up. Thanks so much.